putting this together. And I will jump right in. If you know my work, I try to concentrate on the Hudson Valley area, and which of course includes Western Connecticut. Let me put that up right now. I found out very early in my Hudson Valley research that a lot of cases either began in Putnam, Dutchess, Westchester, and ended particularly in the Danbury area in the 1980s, or vice versa. And there are still cases to this day that begin in Western Connecticut and end up in New York. So they are inexorably connected here. And I will start right off. Now, some of you might be familiar with Stewart Airport, which is right near Newburgh, near the Hudson River. And one of the reasons I love doing what I do is because new cases keep coming up all of the time. And by new, I mean new to me, not new time-wise, as you will see with this. And I just spoke to somebody last night. So Ron, if you're out there, thank you again for the story you shared with me just last night from August of 88, 89. But this case, this older man was telling me about these very happy summers he spent in this orange shaded area on the bottom. His family had a farm, and every summer he'd get out of his urban area and spend happy summers with cousins and aunts and uncles. And he said they would talk about these strange lights, multicolored lights that could hover, move very quickly, and they would see these lights around this particular field. Well, obviously the 800-pound gorilla in this picture is Stewart International Airport. And you might say, well, of course they see lights. They live next to an airport. But actually this man's family, they began seeing it with his grandparents in the 1890s. So needless to say, there was no Stewart Airport because there were no airplanes. There wasn't anything in the air at that point. And I was so excited when I got this case because I always like to push the envelope a little further back. Speaking of which, if you've seen some of my talks, you know I generally start with the mysterious airship wave of 1909, because again, this sets a precedence. In 1909, no one was flying at night. We had flimsy aircraft. I believe that's either Orville or Wilbur Wright talking to an Army officer here. They just sold this flimsy little aircraft to the Army as their first aircraft. Yet, how do we explain then an article from July 31st, 1909, that a mysterious airship which flies only at night is causing considerable excitement? It's keeping folks up at night watching, because there were aircraft that could hover for long periods of time, go extremely fast, and as you can see, this airplane here, top speed of 42 miles an hour, woo. So it wasn't anything the Wright brothers had built. It was seen for hours, sometimes going throughout New England. In fact, this wave actually began, you can see that orange blob there in Connecticut. In 1908, there were sightings in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and on the Vermont-New Hampshire border, and then in Boston. By the summer of 1909, look at all of these different locations. Just clusters of sightings, tens of thousands of people. Very interesting. I love the pattern up in Quebec there. You can see there was a lot of sightings around the town of Sherbrooke, and then it's almost like a circular pattern around that area. By December of 1909, there were a lot of sightings in Worcester, Massachusetts, New York City, up to Vermont. So what were they? honestly, nobody can tell you because there were no prototypes, no plans, nothing explains the phenomena people were seeing in the air above them. So why this is important is a lot of people like to say, well, all of these craft were stealth government projects. Not in 1909. We could barely get off the ground and stay up in the air, let alone fly for hours, fly quickly, and fly with bright, heavy searchlights. Okay, so the basis of my talk today is seeing, believing. Well, we'd like to think so, but I have some fairly thought-provoking, if not mind-blowing cases to talk about. Here's another case from Pine Bush, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about. Pine Bush is known as the UFO capital of the Northeast, and they are getting a permanent UFO and paranormal museum starting in the spring, so which is going to have a lot of programs, so stay tuned. This is Heritage Lane in Pine Bush. This is an actual picture of the cul-de-sac. Now, any given night of the week during the 90s, 100 people or more might show up on nearby West Searsville Road. That was the ground zero for sightings. And what sets Pine Bush apart, not only the number of sightings, but a lot of things seem to come out of the ground or back into the ground, which is pretty unusual. Well, this night, these men are on West Searsville. They see a white pulsing strobe-like light. They follow it to the end of Heritage Lane, and this is just my artist, and I use that term loosely, my artist rendition, that back in the woods there, they see this white pulsing light with almost a haze or fog around it. They both agree to this. And then it gets a little strange, because then the one man said that out of the ground came what looked like an enormous red 2x4 with sparks coming out of it. This object rose up out of the ground, pivoted, and went back into the ground. That is remarkable, but not nearly as remarkable as the man standing directly next to him saw this. He described what he said looked like a Ferris wheel on fire, that this enormous bright object came rotating up out of the ground about to the treetop level and then spun and rotated back down into the ground. Both absolutely remarkable sightings, and to this day, they argue about this. I have a podcast called UFO Headquarters, and we had these two men on, and it's wonderful to hear their descriptions. And then they say, well, I don't know what you were looking at because it looked like a Ferris wheel on fire. And the other one, how can you say that? It was just a long bar. So again, whatever the nature of these craft, these objects are, they do something to our powers of perception. Could they both have been right? I suppose, but again, where is the truth? Now, where a lot of these cases I'm talking about, things are completely different. Sometimes over the course of years and distance, things are eerily familiar or similar. This was a case in Saugerties in 1953. Man by the name of Hank was out playing with his friends, and they saw this enormous cigar-shaped craft. Let me show you a real artist's rendition. Michael Schratt made this for me. And it was a cylindrical craft with what they described as alternating hula hoops of light. 1950s, that's, you can understand why they used the term hula hoops. So red, green, hula hoops of light around it. By the way, everyone is panicking. It's the Cold War. They think it's a Russian bomb. So Stewart Airport, which at the time was Stewart Air Force Base, scrambles 3 jets to come after this thing, and it, as the craft are approaching, it just went straight up and disappeared. And the next day in the newspaper, they said, oh, nothing to worry about. It was a weather balloon. Uh-huh. Well, this was a case that someone told me about from Putnam County in 2002. So we're forwarding about 50 years. It's late March, early April, and as you know, if you live in the Northeast, it can still be very cold. There was still snow on the ground, and about 9:30 at night, he went out to get some firewood. And you can see he took a photo. This is his actual backyard, his view. And you can see in the upper right there, he sketched in what he described as a wedge-shaped craft to the north. The craft was hovering there for a minute or two, started to slowly move to the west, and then he made this picture for me. Might be a little difficult to discern what's going on, but he has the craft there. And I said, what are you depicting here? He said, as the craft started moving away, it was suddenly surrounded by hula hoops of light. And a big light bulb went off when he said that. So other sides of the river, 50 years apart, a cylinder and a wedge-shaped craft, but both having these hula hoops of light. Does it have something to do with the propulsion, something that makes it hover? I don't know, but clearly that is a coincidence that as a UFO researcher, you better believe I pay attention to that. Okay. I don't know how many of you out there are old enough to even remember the 1970s, but there was a show I used to watch called PM Magazine, because they'd often have a lot of strange stories, and let's face it, I gravitate towards the strange. And this was some clips from an episode they had. This man here on the right with his back towards the camera, let's just call him Frank. He did not want his name used because he was a police officer in Pine Bush. And the night of January 4th, 1971, as so many UFO stories begin, he got up to use the bathroom. And there's a field behind his house. And he looks out, and his words were, "Mother of God, what is this?" Because what he saw in the field behind his house, an artist sketched this for him, was a saucer-shaped object, very large. He said a deep crimson, bright, pulsing light. This is not the weird part, because it would go through this red pulsing phase. It would turn this greenish intense blue, and every time it turned to green blue, the size of the craft was physically smaller. Now, this man was in the Army. He, was a police officer. He had excellent powers of observation, and he absolutely would swear on a stack of Bibles that when it was red, it was much bigger. When it was green, it was much smaller. Again, how do we, in the laws of physics, explain this? I certainly can't. Well, on the other side of the field from where he was seeing this, he had a friend who was an officer at the airport, once again, Stewart Airport. So he called him up and he said, it's 3:30 in the morning, I should point that out. And his friend is like, "What are you calling me in the middle of the night?" He said, "Trust me, go look at the field between our two houses." So the man's gone for quite a while. He finally comes back, and in his best military tone, he says to Frank, "I did see something, but I will swear in a court of law that I didn't see anything and that this conversation never took place." So to me, that is a resounding affirmation that this was something very strange, probably something career ending if he was to go to, his superiors the next day and say what he saw. All right, let's go to Norwalk, Connecticut now, 1972. On East Rocks Road, a woman and her two daughters, one of which let's call Lisa, is leaving church. It's about dusk. There's still some light. And a circular craft like this one with red, green, yellow, and blue bright lights starts following them, maybe about 60 feet above the car. I know I would be very nervous if I was being followed by a craft like this. That this craft followed them for 2 miles to their house. They pull into the into the driveway. The mother and the 2 kids run into the house and they start telling the father. Well, the father wants to see this thing. So he says to the girls, you stay here where you will be safe. This isn't going to end well. So he gets back in the car with the mother and they go out driving to try to find this thing. Well, they didn't find it, but the craft found Lisa again, because neighbors, and I have interviewed some of them, suddenly hear Lisa screaming. So it's a nice, nice quiet neighborhood, as you can see. They come out of their houses, dozens of them, and there is Lisa running down the middle of the street screaming, it's chasing me, it's after me. And sure enough, the craft is right above her, following her down the street. Well, Lisa is so terrified and traumatized to this day, she would not talk to me. However, one of the neighbors, we'll call Deanna, did talk to me and said that here were all of these dozens of people looking at this incredible craft going down the street. And she said, it didn't just fly away. What it did was it changed into the shape of what she called a barbell or a dumbbell, a center shaft, and the 2 ends were spinning rapidly. And even that just didn't fly away. It shrunk into a smaller barbell, a smaller one, until it just shrunk to a point and disappeared. It was like it collapsed into itself. Now, a lot of people think these craft are interdimensional. Well, I think this is a big selling point towards possibly being interdimensional. But that does not explain how a large, brightly lit saucer can transform itself into the shape of a barbell. So this, to me, is one of the most remarkable of cases. Okay. 1974 in the town of Highland, which is a small town. You may know where the town of Poughkeepsie, New York is. Four friends are just out driving around and they see across the river past Poughkeepsie, they see some unusual lights. So unusual enough that they stop and start looking at them. And the lights get closer and closer. And the man I spoke to said that when it got close enough, this object looked, what he said, like a mountain in the sky. Do you know that the lava rocks, the volcanic black rocks, he said that's what this material looked like. And he said it was the size of the city of Poughkeepsie. Okay, so let that sink in. The size of the city of Poughkeepsie, a mountain in the sky. And underneath, attached to the flat part, he said was what looked pretty much like a typical flying saucer, like it was connected, almost docked, let's say, to the bottom of this mountain in the sky. And he said it definitely looked like it could detach. Now, there's a great detail here. But let me first Why is this sketch on a paper plate? You might be asking. Well, I had given a lecture in the town of Highland. And after my lecture, this man was telling me his story. And I said, you know, I cannot picture what you're trying to tell me. Could you sketch it for me? Well, the only paper we could find was on the refreshment table. There were some paper plates left over. So he, you know, we got a pen and he sketched this for me. So as a researcher, you take evidence any way you can get it. And he said, you know, I'll make a better sketch of it and send it to you. I said, no, I love the paper plate sketch. So I continue to use this. And the detail I want to show you, the windows. You can see how he went over the windows a couple of times, because on the first pass, he had kind of drawn squares. And he says, no, that's not right. He was adamant that the corners of all the windows were rounded. There were no squared off edges. And again, as somebody who interviews a lot of people, that is a fabulous little detail. This is something this man was transfixed by, you know, that really paying attention to the features. He's still in touch with one of the other witnesses to this day. And he said every time they run into each other, the first thing they say is, do you remember that mountain in the sky? And I can't blame them, because this would certainly make an impression on me if I were to see it. Okay, let's go to the 15th hole of the Mill River Country Club in Stratford, Connecticut. It's August of 1986. There's still some daylight. It's toward dusk, still plenty of light. And again, this is a sketch the witness made for me. You can see we have Ray, the father, Chris, the son, and their friend Matt. And they're just having a great summer, you know, evening game of a round of golf. And they look up, and very close to them is this enormous gunmetal grayish saucer with red and blue lights. And right next to it, actually to the side and back a little, is the identical craft. So there's two of them. And let me get my little red pointer. Ray said the first craft suddenly made a very rapid movement in this direction. And this craft behind it then followed and made the same movement. So then they were still in the same relative position. And then he said the first one started zipping off this direction. And again, oh, I blew it. Hang on. And then this craft did the same thing. So they got to this point here. They're in the same position, and they just disappear. They didn't zoom off. They didn't shrink to a point. They were just gone. So again, you might think this is the strange part of the story, but it isn't. Because when I interviewed Ray, he said he kept harping on that it was so eerily silent. It was completely quiet. How can an objects this huge hover and move so rapidly without making a single sound? Now, I communicated with Chris. He sent me his description of the event. And one of the first things Chris said was, it was so deafeningly loud. And I'm like, what? He said, oh, it was so loud. It was just deafening. And Ray, I have to say, he was not an old man at this point. He was not hard of hearing. His hearing was just fine. I'd love to talk to Matt if they can track down Matt. Did he think it was silent, or did he think it was loud? Again, how does this happening? They're standing shoulder to shoulder. They absolutely agree on the size, shape, color, and movement of the craft, yet one doesn't hear a sound, and the other one, it was so loud, it was disturbing. Okay, The night of November 17th, 2016. This would be what happened on this one night would be a good year of UFO sightings. So I'm going to walk you through this very bizarre night. 5:15 p.m. Woman by the name of Janice is driving near the town of Patterson, and she sees a bright yellow flash and then a bar of bright yellow light that then disappears. This doesn't last for long, but obviously nothing she'd ever seen before. So, well, what was that? At the same time, over near the town of Brewster, another witness saw the same bright light, yellow bar of light in the Kent area, actually. So this was about 9 miles away. So this was not a localized event. This either happened multiple times or happened at an altitude that over the range of 9 miles people could see it. All right. So curious, not the most earth-shattering of sightings. Let's get a little more earth-shattering now. Over in the town of Montgomery, 15 minutes later, these are estimated times. Montgomery, you can see, is not far, just to the south of Pine Bush. And this man's gotten home from work, and there's a big field behind his house, and he wanted to relax and do some hunting. 5:30 p.m. on November 17th. It's dark out at this point, but that doesn't bother him. He's an outdoorsman. He camps and hunts and fishes. He could live in the woods if he needed to. But this night he's walking across the field, and he said all of a sudden he was gripped by an intense fear. Those were his words, intense fear, to the point of almost panic. He can't understand what's going on. He's in the field behind his house. He's been there 1,000 times. So he stops short, and just before he's ready to turn and literally run for home, this is how terrified he is. He sees that not too far in front of him, there's a figure. It's dark. All he can see is a dark silhouette. It's probably just a little taller than he is, a little taller than a normal sized person. But what really caught him were the elbows. Again, I love these little details. He said the arms were bent oddly, unnaturally at the elbows. So he realizes, had that fear not gripped him and stopped him when he did, he would have walked right into this figure. And I wouldn't want to walk into a dark figure with strange elbows, let me tell you. So again, he's about to run for home when he sees some lights off to the side. And at first he thinks it's 3 SUVs that for some reason are speeding through this field, which nobody should have been driving there. But he looks, they're rectangular, flat roofed, brightly lit, and they're racing across the field, which was very hilly and bumpy, but they're not moving up and down, or they're not getting, tossed about on the field, because they're not touching the field. They are racing across the field. So we have this bizarre figure. We have these 3 UFOs, for a better term, racing across the field. Yes, at this point, that was it. He turns around, runs back home. And when he gets back home, he's white as a sheet. He's probably close to hyperventilating. And the family could see he was absolutely terrified. And he said to this day, 4 years later, he will not go out into that field at night. That's like saying you're not going to go into your own backyard anymore. And he even said to me, I will take this to my grave. Now that's a pretty startling, definitive statement. That's how intense this encounter was this night. But we are not done, because back over near Pauling, this woman is driving along, and she sees 8:45 p.m. She sees what she described as kind of like a very dark boomerang, but it did have some lights. Now, nobody else is on the road. She has her cell phone. So her first thought is, I'm stopping the car. I'm getting out. I'm taking pictures of this. She feels this, guess what? Intense fear. And it's like this voice in her head saying, you can't stop. It's too dangerous. You can't take a picture. It's too dangerous. And so she just keeps driving, and the craft passes directly over her car. And as soon as it's done, she's like, wait a minute. It wasn't dangerous to pull over. I could have pulled over anywhere. There's nobody else here. It was like something had gotten into her head and didn't want its picture taken. And she said later that night, she doesn't know if there was missing time, but she said she felt very disconnected. Something was very off. But we are not done. Thanks to Mike Panicello, who you just heard before me. He told me about a sighting that same night, about 8:45 p.m., about the same time as the witness saw the boomerang. It was a solid black triangle, a red light in front, and alternating red and white lights in the rear. And this craft was moving very slowly. I believe she said it took about 3 minutes to go a mile. So not a lot of aircraft can stay in the air at about 20 miles an hour. You need lift generally. This craft also made a 90-degree turn. It didn't bank, which is something we hear all the time. They're going one direction and suddenly they're going 90 degrees off. So I love, as you've seen, you might have guessed, I love plotting the locations of cases. And I said, I wonder if we can connect the dots here. And pretty much, yes, along this line, for whatever reason, the night of November 17th, 2016, we had a yellow flash and bar. We had some sort of cryptid or being sighting, rectangular UFOs, a boomerang, and a triangle. As I said, this would have been a great year of sightings, and it all happened with the span of a couple of hours. This is what makes it so wonderful to be a researcher in this area, because you never know when this is going to happen. I bet we could probably extend that line out in either direction. I'm sure more was going on that night. All right, well, we can't talk about this area without talking about abductions. I started calling the Hudson Valley Abduction Alley when I was doing the research for my first book, and found out that a very startling percentage of people had intense interactions, missing time, and probable abductions. So I didn't want to give you any old abduction. I have two that I think are rather startling. This is up in Amsterdam, New York. It's near Albany, summer of 1994. This woman, let's call her Jane, is babysitting for the little boy and this little girl. Let's call the boy Eric. And they're just playing tag and hide and seek. And all of a sudden, they stop dead because there's this enormous UFO. She said the best way she could describe it, it looked like a giant loaf of Italian bread and was school bus yellow. Now, I had not heard of a case like this before, but she was adamant this is what it looked like. It was coming directly for them. And again, she thought it was going to hit the house and there was going to be this terrible accident. She's thinking, I have to get the kids inside and I have to call my mother, who's a nurse, because we're going to have a crash. So she has the very great description. She has the kids behind her. They're backing up towards the house, almost like in a crab crawl, with this giant UFO coming down straight for them. The next thing she knows, the parents are home. Now you can imagine the parents of these kids. It's always interesting when someone is babysitting your kids. But when you come home and you find the front door standing wide open, the back door standing wide open, the kids are not in bed because the kids are clutching on to Jane. They're in a big chair. All three of them are hanging on to one another for dear life, sound asleep. They have the hardest time waking them up. They finally wake them up. Well, Jane, we need an explanation. Why are the doors open? Why are the kids not in bed? So they all start telling them about this UFO. Well, they don't want to hear anything about it. What a ridiculous excuse. Needless to say, they never hire her again to be their babysitter because they think she's just completely irresponsible. Jane tried to tell her own mother and friends, and nobody would listen to her. So she didn't talk anything about it anymore. Well, let's fast forward 20 years later in the town of Colony. I like to say this is probably the first time a macaroni grill has been used in a UFO presentation. 2004, 30 miles away from Amsterdam in the town of Colony is this macaroni grill restaurant. And Jane is now a very successful businesswoman. She owns not one, but two dental clinics, dental practices. So she's meeting with her mother, and they're just, talking small talk. And a woman comes over, starts talking to Jane's mother, and it's obvious they knew each other from a long time ago, but Jane doesn't recognize her. And finally, this woman turns to her and says, "Oh, you were the girl who was babysitting for my children the night you played the UFO game." And Jane was still very sensitive about this. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, that was not a game. It really happened." So this woman says, "You sound just like my son, Eric. He's a chef here at this restaurant. What are the chances that they all meet here?" So Eric comes out of the back of the kitchen, goes straight up to Jane and says, "Please tell me you remember the bright yellow UFO that night." So she was so relieved. Validation, vindication. Finally, the two mothers, they said, "Well, we're sorry we didn't believe you, but your stories have never changed in 20 years." So they finally had to believe it. So then we have the movie It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. A family in Big Indian, New York, which Big Indian is very tiny, and Phoenicia is not much bigger. This mother and her four kids went to the not so big town of Phoenicia to watch this movie in 1963. Now, it's supposed to be about 10 minutes to get home. They're on their way home, and the mother had been described to me as this really capable, no-nonsense businesswoman. She was in very high-end real estate. The kids had never seen her get upset, get rattled. She was always in charge until she's screaming at the kids, get down, and she slams on the brake of their country squire station wagon because in the middle of the road is this massive circular, brightly lit craft. So the mother is obviously, near hysteria. The kids drop to the floor. And what this one woman told me, she was a little kid at the time, the car is brightly lit up. She drops to the floor. She's looking at the carpet of the station wagon. And she said all the fibers rose up and started vibrating, which again, that just gives me goosebumps even talking about this. Was there static electricity? Was there something else going? What causes this fabric to get up and start vibrating? The next thing they know, they're home. The father and the grandmother run to the door. "Where have you been? You should have been home 45 minutes ago." They don't remember a thing. They said, "We got out of the theater. We came home. Should have been 10 minutes. So they can't account for this 35 minutes of lost time. and at this point have no recollection. Well, here's this magic 20 years ago again, 20 years later. The kids are grown up, they have their own families, they get together for this big family dinner. And all of a sudden, one of this girl's brothers says, wait a minute, why did we never talk about what we saw the night coming home from the movies? And they said it was like a switch going off. The mother and the four kids all at once remember this huge craft and the carpet vibrating, and they couldn't quite tell what had happened during that time, but they all remembered, and they all remembered the same thing. Actually, one of the brothers, you may have heard of Dr. John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatrist. He went to see John Mack and had hypnotic regression. And if whether or not you believe in hypnosis, this boy, this man now recalled that it was an abduction scenario. Both him and his sister were taken on this craft. But I like to call these cases memory embargoes, where you think something happened, but it's years later before you realize how much actually happened, or that you just completely forget something until years later. All right, the last case I want to talk about, Monroe, New York, 1982. There's this nice big house, 2-story, set back from the main road, very quiet, very dark area. This couple is in bed, and their bedroom has this large bank of windows. And all of a sudden, this woman said it was like 2 Mac headlights shining in the 2nd-story window. Her dogs are going ballistic. She said she should have been terrified, but the next thing she knows, she's waking up, had no recollection of what happened after that. Now, she's trying to tell her husband that there was a UFO outside their window that night, the night before, and he is a science teacher, and he doesn't want to hear anything about this. He needs proof. So he goes outside, and 5 minutes later, he comes running in, again, white as a sheet. Call the police, call the sheriff, call everybody, because they had been doing some construction. So they had a truckload of sand delivered. And when they went to bed, there was a mountain of sand in their driveway. But first thing in the morning, this was all that was left. And thank heaven they thought to take Polaroids. I have another picture of the Polaroid. You can see concentric circles. Did the sand get blown away? Did the sand get taken? They don't know. They don't know where did a mountain of sand go? You can't see it anywhere. And what was left in these rings was just a little layer of sand that was heated and pressed into the blacktop. So something probably 15 to 20 feet in diameter landed in their driveway, was hot enough and heavy enough to heat the pavement and press the sand into it. And where did the sand go? We don't know. So these cases, to me, how do you explain this other? Well, let me put it this way. The science teacher who lived there had no explanation for this. And I don't know that we can find any normal explanation. So these are the books I currently have. The project I am working on now is animal reaction cases, which I think are extremely important. Aurelio, maybe next year I will be giving the animal reaction lecture, because so many of these cases we overlook that, oh, the dog was barking 5 minutes before the UFO showed up, or all the horses were acting very strange. Animals somehow sense when a craft is approaching. They have much stronger, often much stronger reactions than we do. I think they are very important witnesses. So that is what my current obsession and project is. So let me stop the share, and I will be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Linda. That was, wow, that was a great presentation. And yes, let's look forward to a animal reaction presentation next year.
Sign me up.
So we have a question already from, let's see, from, hold on a second. Let me see. Oh, sorry. Just, okay. Hold on a second, please.
Sure.
This is from James. He asks, there are many abduction cases highlighted in the area. Most, let's see, most are returned. However, with newer missing 411 cases, abductees missing appear to be older and frail or children. Does this, is there any correlation between your cases on abducted profiles?
There's only one case that I know of where the person was not returned, and I really don't know what their physical status was. But yes, David Politis and his 411 cases give me nightmares. He does some amazing work, and I am just not aware in this particular region of cases where people disappear and don't return, which is a good thing. they're at least returned.
Okay. Hold on a second. Let's see. Have reports stopped in the last 4 years? If not, what was the most recent?
Recent, I'd say the last year or so, there are a lot of smaller triangle sightings. In fact, I just spoke to Chris DePerno, who's head of New York MUFON, and last week, and he said they already have more cases, I think, this year than all of last year combined. He said he has an average of about 30 cases ongoing. They now have over 300. This year has been discs, triangles, cylinders, you name it, activity. I don't know if Mike mentioned the case numbers in Connecticut, but certainly here in New York, we're running 10 times what we normally do.
I had a conversation prior to the presentation with Mike, and he said at the beginning of the pandemic, they had a large caseload. People just, seeing lots of lights in sky craft, but it died down over the summer since the quarantine has lifted. But he says there might be a little bit of an uptick in terms of sightings in the next few months, but right now is probably at a low point here for the state of Connecticut.
Okay.
So let's see.
Well, let me just point out, you can go to the MUFON database and check their latest. It's free. You can check their latest cases by location, by type of craft. So that information, at least through MUFON, is available. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. We have a question from Thomas. Have you ever spoke to anyone who lived in a neighborhood that had UFOs so often that on one occasion, walking their dog at 10 p.m., a massive UFO was over the street, and after a minute of observation, they went in and watched the news as the UFO presence was the norm circa in the 1980s?
You would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how many people told me, particularly in the 1980s, they'd be out walking the dog or driving the car, and they'd look up, oh, it's that boomerang again, or it's that triangle again. Yes, it was so commonplace. You have to remember the wave of the 1980s was basically 6 or 7 years long. And so the 10th or 15th time someone was seeing this craft, and I've interviewed people who they're all I just talked to somebody a few weeks ago who was at a private school in Putnam County, and this massive craft, all the kids come out, all the teachers come out, and it's just hovering there. And after about 15 minutes, the kids are like, all right, let's go back in and watch TV or play. I know, but some people, it's just, it's okay, I saw it, I don't know what it is, but no, I have better things to do. But yes, in this area, absolutely, there was UFO fatigue, let's put it, that, it happens so often.
Does anyone have any more questions? We have another one. Hold on a second. Okay. Another one from Thomas. Is the area of Joe's Hill Road, Danbury-Brewster border, called Devil's Den because of an alleged UFO landing in the 1970s?
You tell me, James, because I am not familiar with that and would love to find out.
Yes,
what was the name of that? I'm writing it down right now.
That is from Thomas.
Okay. Oh, Thomas.
In the area of Joe's Hill Road.
Okay.
Danbury-Brewster border, called Devil's Den because of an alleged UFO landing. I think I've heard that as well.
Okay.
I cannot confirm. That's a very good question, Thomas. Thank you for asking that.
Yes, Thomas, you've got me on the hunt. I will see what I can find out. Thank you.
Just so you know, if there's anyone who would like to ask questions for Linda in private, I would say you can contact you via your Facebook. We have the Facebook link on the event page on the library for Linda's Facebook page, her author page, and everything. And I'm sure Linda's more than happy to get any sort of questions regarding UFO sightings, alleged, abduction phenomenon, anything that you may have, any sort of witness sightings or anything that you may have experienced personally. Linda is very discreet. As you can tell from her presentations, she will change the names and ask your permission if she would like to relay the story in her presentations or document it in her books. So let me see. There's one more question that we can try to get. Let's see. Why do you think abductions happen, Linda?
I think we are like lab animals to them in a way, just as we study every other species we come upon, particularly since a lot of these abduction cases are multi-generational. Just as someone, a scientist in a lab will study generations of rats, hate to compare us to rats, but they do seem to, whatever it is they're looking for, they like to follow generations of the same family. That's the only thing. I mean, there's all sorts of theories that they have an agenda, these different programs, but on the surface of it, they're obviously very curious about us and are just studying us.
Excellent. Let me see if we can try to get one more question. From Virginia, any information on sightings at the Danbury Drive from 1983 to 1984? So I think she's mentioning the Danbury Drive-In.
Oh, the Danbury Drive-In. Not particularly, but you might want to check with, there's a man by the name of Preston Dennett who just wrote a book about UFOs at the drive-in. And you can easily find Preston Dennett online and check with him. And if you have a drive-in story, I'm sure he would love to hear it. I would love to hear it. I love drive-in stories. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch with me for any stories or questions.
Awesome. Well, Linda, thank you so much for being with us here today. Be sure, everyone, to follow her on Facebook and to visit her author page on Amazon. I'm sure, you know, if you buy a book from her, she will autograph it for you. I'm not sure how that works with Amazon these days, but I'm sure if you would, you know, purchase a book from her directly, she will kindly autograph it for you.
Absolutely.
And
And we will be on the panel tomorrow at 1:30.
exactly, certainly, with Dr. Bill Burns. That's going to be really, really interesting. And I just want to say to everyone, we are going to end this in about a minute. Just so you know, we're going to take a break for about a half hour, and we're going to resume at 1 p.m. with Shane Searway with his presentation, More Strange Disappearances. So this might also kind of tap into the abduction phenomena that Linda was talking about as well in her presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the Zoom meeting right now. So just don't worry. All you have to do is take a break, go eat something, you know, get something to drink, and we'll all meet back here. Just click on the Zoom link that you got before this morning, and we'll resume again at 1 p.m.